the challenge you have is if you open that up, you have to be careful that if you set it too low, you'll just drain the lake out, and
Right.
that's not what
Okay.
we want to do.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
but those are all good points to consider on if the project should be carried forward or not.
Thanks. Thank you. And maybe you already answered this. So what is the driver for this project? Because Councilmember Whalen brought up a good point. If you're, this city doesn't want to have to pay, $3 million, and part of that is affecting private property and should be paid for by private property owners. I know you already made that point. So what's the impetus behind this coming forward?
Did you? Oh, okay. Unless Jose has something to add, the only thing I can think of is somebody championed it as a fish passage replacement culvert to help fish passage.
Not taking into account that
All the other complexities.
it's going to affect private property and. Okay, I mean that's kind of what I thought, but.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's all I know about that. The next project we have, CIP4, that was previously identified. It's a smaller scale. It's on 11th Avenue here, filling in ditches with storm drains and backfill and some catch basins, and providing a piped system along 11th. We didn't really change anything on that one. The cost prior from 2019 was about $300,000. We're up to $700 with our current estimate, based on recent prices and things like that. One thing that we did was we added some treatment BMPs for this project, a couple of them, because when you add in the hard surfacing along the side of the road, if that's subject to vehicular use, and it probably would be, then that would probably exceed the thresholds triggering water quality treatment. So that's why we added some costs in for that. And again, the next slide just shows the critical areas applicable to the project area. CIP, were there any questions on that one? That's like one of the most straightforward ones. CIP 7, the next project, Oak Street and 17th was originally what it was called. This is another one that we really looked at closely on that one. The project would basically transfer stormwater from one problem area into a different sub-area. So we looked at contours, we looked at flow paths, and you may be helping out one area, but you could very well be causing flooding problems in a different area because you're sending water to a place where it's not currently going. And so we thought that that was not really an appropriate solution for this area. So what's been done is it's been changed by definition to be in support of the park by adding some sidewalk connectivity and some parking for the park. If we go to the next slide, yeah, just basically filling in the ditch with some gravel, storm drains, catch basins. There's gonna be some saw cutting along the pavement to do the construction and curb and gutter. The project would also include parking for the park, and for that, we've included allowances for stormwater treatment, and then also an underlying layer of gravel for storing water for infiltration. We don't really know what elevations are available for us if flow control is used, so we just assume filtration. When you do that, you can have a pretty wide area that's available for that. Even if the soils aren't that good, you can still get some infiltration. So that's what we based our estimate on for this project. And then it goes from, again, the current park area up to 15th for the project location there. And then the next slide illustrates the critical areas. And then the next slide, the challenge for this project is the ditch is not just its own ditch. It's part of an overall conveyance system. that ends up in a stormwater treatment facility up by the interurban trail near the city's facilities. So what we didn't want to do is take something that's flowing through a ditch, putting in a pipe, and sending it somewhere faster, because that could create a problem for that downstream facility. So this project here includes a lot of surveying to get good storm system information, because we have a lot of plan layout, but we don't have a lot of elevation. So we wanted to get something that we could build a reliable model on, to model this conversion of the ditch to a pipe system to see if that would impact the downstream system. And if we could do it in such a way that it wouldn't, then we might not have to have the flow control provided for the parking, but would definitely need its own water quality treatment. And then the last slide associated with CIP 7 just shows the overall boundaries of the surveying that we would be doing. And the cost estimate for that project really doesn't compare to what was previously done because the whole definition has changed on that one.
Any questions about that? Councilor Hall?
11th Avenue, is it just that one section?
Yeah, so from,
This,
yeah,
where there's that ditch in, that goes in front of Laurel out here?
right, in front of the park all the way up to 15th.
Oh, I see.
So,
Okay, all right, thank you.
yep.
In some of your mitigation on this, is it possible that we may be looking at additional storm ponds or something that would have to mitigate that flow?
That's what we looked at. At first, I was looking at possibly using a vault, but the problem with the vaults, the footprint for vaults are contingent on how your depth to your connecting system, because that relates to the live storage you can get. We didn't really know what those elevations would be. I made some assumptions based on contours, but for shallow vault, the footprint gets just really big. So we bagged that, and that's why I looked at putting in the gravel layer underneath everything to allow for storage of the water and for infiltration. So that's what we based the estimate on that approach. But if it comes up not being needed, then it would save that cost.
Okay.
The next project I'd like to talk about is CIP 9, Xavier and 14th. I think you may have passed that up. So if we go back a slide or two. Oh, okay. All right. Y'all, okay. Y'all may not have this one. This is one that we're not carrying forward anyway. So my apologies for that. I had sent information regarding the ones we were carrying forward, and I inadvertently left this one out. But this CIP was one that had been previously identified, but again, we went to the field, drove the area, took pictures, looked at contours, and it was like it just didn't make sense to carry forward because there were improvements in some areas and not others, and so it didn't look like it would be appropriate to carry forward. And then it would transfer problems downstream, possibly, so that one got completely taken out. So my apologies that you don't have copies of this, but if you need copies, I'll just leave this here if it needs to go in the record. And then the last two projects.
I'm sorry. Can I just chime in there?
Okay.
Could you just, where was that one, just for our own edification?
It's in the south end of the city, kind of the southeast. It's by Xavier and along 13th, down in that area. It's basically at the south end of the city. But again, there's several blocks in there that look like, to me, is like, if you do something on this street, why aren't you doing it over here? And there was no reason that we could find as to why it was originally proposed. So
Thank you.
So the last two projects, we're just in the process. We haven't finalized the numbering of the CIPs, so we just randomly assigned them AAA and BBB. There's nothing special about that. But they're connected, and they're at Porter and Juniper and in the vicinity of 7th Avenue. So this project, AAA had some flooding associated on the, I guess, northerly, easterly side of Porter Way. And so this project would include replacing the existing culvert under Porter. These pictures, the ones on the left are the inlets to the culvert. There's apparently two of them that somehow connected to one culvert. And then the one on the right is the downstream channel along Juniper. And that picture was taken in the wintertime, I think back in 2021. And there, it's cut back really well, but in the summer, it gets really, really thick. So it's going to be important that that vegetation always be maintained there to maintain that good flow in that channel so it doesn't cause upstream problems. And if we go to the next slide, it shows a little bit more schematically what's happening there. And if we go to the last one, or the next slide, I should say, it shows the limits of the project and then connecting to an existing drainage structure and getting those systems reconnected back. This project would include some head walls and safety bars on the culvert. We'd also recommend some television inspection of the pipe to make sure that if there's like a lot of sediment or something that's accumulated in it, that the design be carried forward to keep that from happening in the new culvert if at all possible. So that way you just don't end up with another plugged new pipe. There was not a prior planning estimate for this one because it was never on the books. It's been recently added. So, and then the next slide are the critical areas for the project. And then if we go to the next slide, this is the last one in the current list that we're considering. And this is providing sidewalk connections from 7th Avenue down to where, to the south and where it connects to the existing sidewalk that ends there. So the 5th Avenue project is supposed to be finishing sidewalk to 7th, and then this would finish that link. It would include, saw cutting, pavement, curb gutter, sidewalk. There would be some drainage system put in so we could pick the stormwater up and then discharge it onto the northerly side of Porter Way. And it would also include some retaining wall because of the slope of the embankment there. This project would need to be done after or in conjunction with the culvert project because you wouldn't want to go in and put in your new sidewalk and retaining wall, then have to take part of that out for a new culvert. And then advancing through the exhibits, we see again the critical areas. And then to the last page, there is a summary sheet of the project costs and schedule. And in that table, it's broken out by, well, what's the construction, conceptual level, opinion of construction cost, and then all of the ancillary costs. Again, all the surveying, permitting, engineering, city admin, contingency, construction admin, things like that. And then also the anticipated year of design. The Porter Avenue sidewalk, that's very important to the city for scheduling purposes to get that sidewalk connection completed. So that one and the Porter Avenue culvert would be starting design in 2024, construction in 2025, and then the other projects would come later on. So those are the projects with a very high-level overview of what they include. That's the basis of the rate study. Any further questions on that? Thank you.
Steve, Mayor Pro Tem, sorry, wait, I have one question for you, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that. Just wait, do I need to be recognized for study sessions? Yeah, okay. I just looking at the AAA and just to a lesser extent BBB, the east side of Porter Way there, the photos kind of show the culvert itself. I'm trying to visualize what that would look like after it's complete. And you mentioned building an embankment.
It would just be one, it would be one pipe is what we do to have it coming out. So there's apparently two pipes there that somehow interconnect into one 36-inch diameter pipe. And so that would just, all of that would be taken out. There'd just be the one culvert coming out, and there would be like a head wall for it and some safety bars on it.
Okay. And then as far as that sidewalk then, because the Fifth Avenue project is building the sidewalk that is going to be above AAA, I believe. Is that correct?
No, my understanding is the sidewalk ends at 7th.
At 7th.
And this would be from 7th down to where it currently ends.
Okay, I see. I understand. So those, okay, I understand how they're connected. Thank you.
Yeah, and
That's-
then there is an exhibit, maybe if you go, is it the next one that has a larger view? Yeah. So so you can see Seventh up at the top of the upper left, and then you can see on the lower right, the long linear white area along Porter. That's the existing sidewalk.
And the current culverts are just on the north side of Juniper there. Is
Yes.
that right? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. That's what
All right.
that's what I didn't quite visualize.
Okay, thank you.
Another question for you, and maybe Jose, you can answer this. The wetland area that's behind Public Works to the north of the field in that area, does that still feed into that culvert that goes along the one house that is to the west of the fields that I believe is then hooking into this culvert on that point? Is that still a issue that we have back there behind Public Works with that wetland area? Because I know that house has been the flooding issue house there behind the ball fields with that culvert. And with us hardscaping now, 7th to Kent, or whatever is that street, is that going to be problematic with flow then? Going out to the hill of us, basically, we're putting in the ditch out that direction. And I don't know if you can answer that or not, but I just wondering over the past years, have we been having issues still with the flooding behind Public Works coming around the west side of the ball fields, coming past that house into that culvert?
In the last few years, we haven't had much flooding in that area.
That's right, so it
In
hasn't
the
been.
last two to 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
okay.
Steve?
Oh, yeah.
Just a comment. They're damn near impossible to read without the lights.
Oh, okay.
That's impossible to read as it is right now.
It's probably easier just to read these that are in front of us.
It-
yeah.
it- It's better, I'm sorry, in order to make this usable, I have to use a flashlight on this. And maybe somebody else has got it better. They can look at their computer. It seems a little better. But it's a very difficult way to have a presentation. So I'll be just clear on that it could be better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just
So
like-
you all have paper copies?
Do we have a, I'm sorry.
Do we
I
have
interru-
those in
I
our
interrupted,
packets?
And we are now where, on what page in our packet?
So this next section will be, correct, the stormwater utility rate study.
Stormwater utility rate. Now with the lights on, it's easy to see, but I don't know if you got a presentation to put on the.
I've got a paper copy in front of me, so I can just
Oh.
mention what slide we're on.
Yeah, that'd be
and
great.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
I do see that it is hard to see
Yeah.
with the lights on, but with the lights off, hard to read the paper copy, so we can go off of paper for now.
Okay.
So the presentation that Jeff just talked about is a key input into the utility rate study. You know, what capital projects do we need to do? When do we need to do those projects? How much do they cost? That's one part of the rate study. Another part is making sure you have enough money coming in to fund your operating costs, you know, staff, supplies, benefits, those types of things. So as we go through this, you know, kind of keep that in mind. On slide 2, when we talk about tonight's agenda, we'll be talking about 2 different analyses. One is the revenue requirement. We'll talk about that first. The second will be a system development charge analysis. That first one, the revenue requirement analysis, has to do with your monthly rates. You know, what level do your monthly rates need to be to make sure you have enough money coming in the door to pay for your operating and capital costs, those types of things. The second analysis is a optional growth and development related charge. Many stormwater utilities in the region are beginning to implement this type of charge. It would not apply to existing ratepayers, but it would be as new development occurs, they would pay a one-time charge to help reimburse existing customers for the investment that they put into the existing and planned capital of the stormwater utility. So slide 3 provides a little bit of a rate study overview, but the key components of what we're looking at today are in those green revenue requirement items for this section of the presentation. We take a look at your fiscal policies. What reserves should you have in place to make sure you have a minimum operating and capital reserve? What are your annual operating costs? What are your annual capital costs? And then how do you pay for those capital projects? Is it all with cash? That's one of our scenarios. Is it a mixture of cash and borrowing? That's scenarios 2 and 3, which we'll talk about in just a couple of slides. On slide 4, just gives you a snapshot of the current rate schedule for the city stormwater utility. For single-family customers, including duplexes, it's a 3-tiered system based on the percent impervious coverage that a parcel has. So there's tier 1 covers a parcel that's 0 to 40% impervious. They pay $15.50 per month. That's the most common tier for single-family customers. But there is a higher tier 2 and tier 3, which pay $25.50 and $35.50 per month, respectively, in correlation to the percent coverage of impervious area on those parcels. For all other developed parcels within the city, it's a variable charge, essentially, based on measured impervious area. So for every 2,800 impervious square feet, there's a $15.50 charge. So if you have twice that amount, you'll pay twice $15.50 per month. On slide 5 gives a little bit of history on the stormwater rate. And as far back as the records that we are able to get a hold of, the city's rates have been $15.50 since at least 2015. Rates have remained flat. And of course, since that time, there's been quite a bit of operating cost inflation. Construction projects cost a lot more than they did, 8, 9 years ago. There's been additional regulatory requirements that the city has to comply with. That typically takes more staff's time, sometimes materials. There's been some growth and development, requires additional services to handle that. So what $15.50 bought 10 years ago is quite a bit different than what it can buy today. And there's additional regulatory requirements, more costly projects that need to be handled as well. So just as a explanatory item, if the $15.50 had been adjusted for annual consumer price index adjustments, it would be north of $21 per month today. On slide 6, we have the recent financial performance. And all we want to show here is, one, what types of costs the stormwater utility currently pays for. You can see there in that darker gray color, salaries and wages, personnel benefits in that green portion of the stacked column. You have supplies and services, and then what is primarily transfers to the capital fund in that dark green color. So when you add all those up, it's over $1 million per year of annual obligations that the stormwater utility has over the past few years. Just below that is your annual revenue. So you can see revenues have not quite kept up with the financial obligations over the past 3 years, causing a drawdown of fund balance over the past 3 years, projected to be about $330,000 at the end of 2023. That's the operating fund. You do have funds available in the capital and asset replacement funds as well, but that Fund 406 is just a snapshot of operations. All right, that's the background slides. We'll get into slides 7 and 8, which is the start of the revenue requirement section. And that graphic on slide 8 is a quick summary of how much revenue do you need, and it makes sure that you have enough money for your fiscal policies, which we'll get into on the next slide. Make sure that you can cover your operating costs, and then those bottom 2 purple and gold rectangles are how you fund your capital projects, whether it's with rate revenue, cash only, or if you incorporate some level of borrowing, could result in principal and interest repayments over a longer time period. And all that added together is the annual revenue needs of the utility. Slide 9 covers your fiscal policies. We looked at 2 reserve targets, one for the operating fund. Currently, the city has a budgetary target of 25% of annual operating expenditures as a minimum target for Fund 406. That's a pretty common level in terms of an operating reserve, so we didn't recommend any changes to that. For the capital fund, there is no budgetary target. For planning purposes in the rate study, we just assumed that at a minimum, the city should keep in place roughly a couple $100,000 to respond to some type of emergency capital project. So those are the 2 minimum fund targets. That last row at the bottom there, those are your annual transfers, and those are also documented in the city's budget. An annual transfer from the operating fund to the capital fund, that's about 7% of monthly charges. So as monthly charges increase, that minimum transfer also increases to the capital fund. And same goes for the asset replacement transfer. That's just a smaller percentage, 3% instead of 7%. Slide 10, some good news in terms of additional rate revenue. You've got a new customer. I'm sure you've talked about it at many different meetings on many different types of topics. Bridgepoint multi-phase development would add roughly 3.5 million impervious square feet when it's all said and done. That's roughly equivalent to 1,300 single-family homes. So under today's rates, without any additional rate adjustments, they would generate about $230,000 per year in stormwater revenue. So that helps shoulder some of the burden that we'll be talking about in a few slides. It doesn't solve everything, but it does provide some additional revenues separate from what's needed from rate adjustments. Slide 11 gives you a little bit of a snapshot on the starting point for the operating cost forecast in that pie chart. Roughly a third is salaries and wages with benefits on top of that. 40% is supplies and services. And then the remaining 10% or so is those transfers we talked about to capital and asset replacement, as well as miscellaneous items. It's a little bit of a modified 2024 budget, based on discussions with city staff. We used estimated 2023 actuals plus estimated inflation to project what we think will happen in 2024. We thought that was a better indication of where staff are spending their time. So it's a little bit lower than what's shown in the 2024 preliminary budget. And then we grow that operating cost amount by 3 to 4%, depending on the type of line item, to try to keep pace with what we think will happen for salaries, wages, benefits, operating supplies, those types of costs. All right, slide 12. This is the key input from the work that Jeff at Parametrics talked about in the first presentation. It's a stormwater capital project plan. So averages about $1 million per year before inflation. If we apply estimated construction cost inflation, that would bump up to about $1.3 million per year, about $8 million in total between 2024 and 2029. A lot of discussion earlier about Surprise Lake. We are assuming, as Jose mentioned, that would be only 25% cost responsibility for the city. The other 75% we're assuming comes from other outside sources. Could be grants, could be other types of funding, but in terms of what impacts the rate forecast, we're only assuming 25% of that would be funded through the stormwater utility itself. And then CIP 7 and CIP BBB, we're assuming that those are 25 to 30% funded from other city funds to help cover the non-stormwater specific items of those projects, like the sidewalk, for example. Just as a note, as we were digging through some of the historical records of the city, we looked at, since 2007, roughly 60% of stormwater capital projects have either been grant funded or funded by real estate excise tax transfers from the general fund, just as a interesting tidbit there. So we've got one capital plan. We have three funding scenarios. The first is a cash only, no borrowing. That's scenario 1. Scenarios 2 and 3 incorporate some level of borrowing. The second one, less. The third one assumes a little bit more borrowing, just to show you the impact of on rates if you borrow a little or more. So those will be discussed in the next 3 slides, starting on slide 13. This is the all-cash funding scenario, no borrowing. So roughly 2/3 of the CIP would be funded with rate revenue and existing cash reserves. About 1/3 would be funded with grants. That's primarily the Surprise Lake assumed grant. And that essentially makes it a grant contingent project. If the grant doesn't come in, we understand that that project could be delayed into the future. So under this approach, for scenario 1, we have the revenue requirement graphic on the left-hand page of slide 13. Shows the operating costs, just about $1 million per year. The rate adjustments are shown in that dashed line. So it'd be about a $4.50 increase per month to the single-family Tier 1 rate, followed by about a $4 per month increase in 2025. And then lastly, the third year of that big push for phasing in those rates would be about a $3 per month increase. So that by 2029, that monthly Tier 1 rate would be just under $30 per month. It's $15.50 today. But in order to cash fund all your capital projects in this particular scenario, rates had to ramp up a little more quickly to start banking some of that rate revenue to then spend on capital projects over the coming years. So by 2029, with that level of rate adjustments, we're estimating that the city, on an ongoing basis beyond 2029, could fund about $1 million of capital per year with cash. Scenario 2, this starts to incorporate some level of borrowing. About $1.3 million of borrowing is assumed in this scenario. Little less than half would come from rates and reserves. Grants, still that same dollar amount there, 31%. And then over $500,000 would come from other city funds. So this rate design here for scenario 2 puts a little less pressure on rates because we spread out some of those capital costs over a 20-year borrowing term for about $1.3 million worth. So in scenario 1, that Tier 1 rate per month for a typical single-family customer, just under $30 per month. In this scenario on page 14, with some of that borrowing, that Tier 1 rate would be just under $26 per month by 2029. So a savings of about $4 per month for a typical single-family customer does introduce some borrowing for the stormwater utility. Last scenario on slide 15, scenario 3, this assumes a little bit more than double the borrowing of scenario 2 by spreading out more of those capital costs over time. Can lead to lower rates, but you have to, of course, pay back that principal and interest on the borrowing, but does lead to a monthly rate of just under $23 per month for that typical single-family customer. So it gives you an idea of, all cash funding, about $30 per month. Less debt, kind of in the middle, and the most debt would be about $23 per month. And we show that on slide 16, shows the monthly rates for, again, this is a Tier 1 residential customer. This rate also applies to commercial, multifamily, but scales up based on measured impervious area. You can begin to see the differences there in the 3 rows there for scenarios 1, 2, and 3. We were concentrating on the far right-hand slide, year 2029, where there's about a $7 difference between scenario 1 and scenario 3. Now, the same percentage adjustments that are underlying these numbers would apply to all rates across the city for the stormwater utility. We're just using Tier 1 as an example. And then the last slide in the revenue requirement section is a monthly stormwater rate survey. It's it's a mix of cities in the region. There's a couple of counties in there as well. You can see there, just off to the left of center is the city's current Tier 1 rate, $15.50 per month. I'd say less than the average in this comparison group. You can see with the different rate increases for scenarios 1, 2, or 3, that rate in 2024 would also increase to anywhere from $18 to $20 per month for a typical single-family customer. Now, important to put some caveats on this comparison. These are cities and sometimes counties of all different sizes, different mixes of residential versus commercial, which can have an impact on rates, different topographies. Some of these, probably many of these cities are also considering rate adjustments for 2024. So that's something to keep in mind too, but does provide an interesting comparison. You see there, even the all cash scenario 1 rate of $20.15 is just below Edgewood there, and Fife as well. And I know Fife is currently undergoing a stormwater rate study at this time, so they may be looking to adjust rates in the next year or two as well. Any questions on the monthly rate side of the presentation? It's a good break point before we get into the system development charge.
Councilman Strader?
Yes. Why are there such differences in the rates for different city? What are the causes for that? Say, we'll look at Furcrest, and they're relatively the same size as us, but yet they're higher than us. And then you look at Enumclaw, and they're like at the very bottom. And Lakewood, a pretty large city, why are their rates so much lower?
That's a good question. And I don't have all the answers, but I think a lot of it has to do with the size of the city, not necessarily, square miles, but also population. If there's a strong commercial core, a lot of impervious area, say if there's a lot of car lots, for example, that's more equivalent units to spread the cost over. I recall I worked on the City of Lakewood's rate study many, many years ago, and I hope I don't get this wrong, but they have pretty unique hydrology in the city where they can infiltrate where other cities have different soil types. So it could be for a variety of reasons why the rates are what they are. It could be that they haven't updated rates in quite a while, or they have some support, say, from the general fund or real estate excise tax, those types of things. But so while it is interesting, I do want to put a lot of caveats that we don't necessarily know why the rates are different.
Thank you.
Question for you. Do you have an idea of what percentages the Surprise Lake project would be of our increase amount going along? Because I'm thinking if we pulled the Surprise Lake out of it, that makes a big difference in these fees.
Yeah, it would make a difference for sure. It's assumed to be 25% utility funded. So if that puts it, a little bit less than $1 million. So I don't know if that's about 20% of your city-funded capital projects. If you take out the grants and take out the other portions from other city funds. So it is a significant part of the CIP. I estimate it would certainly cut back on some of the potential borrowing and or rate adjustments, but we'd have to go back and look to see what that impact would be. We could do that, of course, with and without that project.
I think it would be interesting to see that because we know the controversy we have over the Surprise Lake
Yeah.
because it's all private property, and for the citizens to bear a cost of that. It would be interesting to see what that would be pulled out of the rate study. Dr. Whalen?
Thank you. Since 2015, excuse me, at the time we were looking to more justify, you might say, the impervious surface of every lot in the city of Middleton. It was a long study. The reasons that was brought up was a lot of different things. There was growth going on in the city. Prior to that, I believe the 1550 was many, many years at that set number. They opted to go to Pierce County and look at the topographicals, look at the maps and so forth, and try to guesstimate. It's a little tongue-in-cheek for estimate because it's a guess. And we came up with the 1550 now. That's 8 years ago. If the rates had increased $1 per tier, where would we be today? If it had gone up $2 every year, which means in 5 years you increase $10. We're about to go to a significant increase to cover the needs we have. So looking for forecasting is how can you make this as gentle to the public, keep up with the cost of living increases, which I can't think of something I buy for $15.50 that doesn't cost $25 now. I mean, I'm not a little tongue in cheek here, but how do you make this gentle for people? First of all, how much do you invest to find out truly what every individual property should be paying by the scales we have? I can mention a show in the city of Milton, 25 or 50 increased development on a piece of property, but I can't say if they're paying more money or not. I don't know. I don't think they are because we took the easy road out not to have to think about the future. What would it be, in your estimation, like $1 a year, $3, something that's tolerable, as opposed to an excessive increase to make up for the deficiencies that the city lacked the courage to put in place? So it's significant dollars we're talking about. And to catch up, I don't want to go back to Pierce County and say, give us another topographical view and guesstimate what the square footage is of the impervious surface. I can pick you out 10 houses that have changed in 10 years, significantly different. How do we do this without coming to a edge of the cliff and needing to sustain our stormwater system without the general public thinking we're all idiots? Because it's going to be a significant change to people. How do you help us make that easier for the future? If I was to turn around and say, well, we've done the cost of living for a lot of things to increase our revenue in different areas, and people can understand that because they know their cost of living. They don't want to pay it, but they know their cost of living is going up significantly. But we wait every 10 or 12 years to make a move on something that has been failing for 8 to 10 years with the revenue that we're getting. So how do you just make it easier? And I can help you sell the program if it's understood. If we put it in and said, we're going to put it in and so forth, and put $1 a year on your rate, every rate, how far would that get us to in the future? So instead of, stormwater is a very important project, don't get me wrong. But to come up every 8 or 10 years and scare the bejesus out of the property owners with a rate increase that they can't justify, it's hard to justify that. Now, if we want to do a total physical survey of the city, I would implore that we do to know where we are today and what we need to do for stormwater in the future, because you're not going to get more land, you're going to get more development. That's just kind of a little philosophy about stormwater. If you don't pay for it the day it starts to increase, you owe interest on that money because it's going to go someplace else. Just a statement from living with this for the last 20 years.
Anybody else?
I think tying into Councilmember Whalen's point a little bit, it looks like the Plan 1 kind of tapers down to a 3% increase each year at some point. Is the idea that increase, and I see that on all the plans, is the idea that 3% increase is kind of a principled this is what we should apply going forward so that we don't have to do this in 2030 again? Or do cities typically tie this to CPI, or what's a good suggestion for us? I mean, we're gonna have to rip the Band-Aid off, it appears, here, but then once we get the Band-Aid off, how do we heal so that we don't kick this can down the road again? Do you have a suggestion for that, or what other cities have done, or anything?
Yeah, a lot of cities will put into an ordinance that, let's just say for hypothetical sakes, you adopt rate increases through, 2026. What do you do beyond there? We're forecasting 3% per year, but a lot of cities will have a annual, say June over June, Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue consumer price index adjustment, so that in between studies, which you might do every 4, 6, or 10 years, you'll have some type of annual adjustment to keep up in part with cost adjustments. I know Fife has some type of formula that builds in part annual index changes, so that in between rate studies, I think for 2023 might have been a 9 or 10% that was sort of an automatic, tough adjustment, but it was built into city code as one way to sort of catch up in between maybe more closer looks, which, every so often you might update the comprehensive plan. I think every 5 years or so, there's a new NPDES permit administered by Ecology. So that there's one coming up, I think goes into effect next summer, right? July 2024. So every so often, there are new regulatory benchmarks, new capital planning numbers. It might be worth looking under the hood a little bit more closely, but there could be a interim option that once, as you say, rip the Band-Aid off, there could be a inflationary type of adjustment to help you keep up so there's not as big of a jump the next time around. That's how some cities have done that.
Just to follow up on that, I just want to kind of weigh in with my stance on this, and I've said this several times in the past. I don't support the city taking on debt, even if it means that we make up for past mistakes that were made in 2015 when the rate was set at 1550. So that's, when it gets to the voting and the discussions, that's likely where I'm going to come out on this.
I was just going to say, I agree with that. I don't think that we should be taking on any debt, and that we need to live within our budget.
One quick comment, if I may, about the discussion of debt versus cash funding. One thing to keep in mind with scenario one, as you need to ramp up rates a little bit more quickly, it'll be important for the city, especially in the mid-2020s, 26, 27, start to monitor, okay, now that we've gotten over the hump, do we need this level of cash funding? Have we accomplished what we hope to accomplish? And maybe if catching up, the annual capital burden might be a little less. I don't know. I probably overstepped my engineering knowledge already with leave that to Jeff and Jose, but something to keep in mind. But I certainly understand that.
And I know that we had this, not with you, but we have with the electrical rate study, with the water rate study, and I think in general, we need to have that same philosophy we did at tackling those as we do, that we need to have tackling this. And I know with the water study, we went with some raising the rates for the citizens, but also financing part of it. Now, and then we have the electrical that we're also, that we have now. So I think that has to fit into the mix of how much debt just overall do we want the city to burden, and then you've got to balance it out with, obviously, increasing the rates. But I think we have to take into account that we also have those other revenue units, those other business units that we have, and how we're dealing with those. But I think that we definitely need to have, a structure in place that, obviously, that you can support your capital projects that you have in the future. I think our philosophy for the water study was also, so then, yes, the citizens could bear some of that, but then, so the whole burden wasn't on the citizens of Milton that the city took on, obviously some of that burden as well. So I think that's like my 5 cents, my, 50 cents. But just in a nutshell, I think we have to take into account what we've done in the past too, so we don't also overburden the city or the citizens. But I definitely think that this is very important to do because you don't want to price yourself out.
Ms. Whalen?
Just to add a little bit, we're now living in a culture that gasoline is 60% higher than it was in 2015. That's a lot. And that's just one small commodity that we're buying. Bread and everything else. And I'm not looking to take money away from people we don't need, monies we don't need, but I'm willing to gamble that you'll pay a little bit up front so you don't pay a hell of a lot when the problems come up. And it's just banking in the future. Yeah, I can't tell you, I could ask my accountant here how many years we've paid 1550, for our storm water. And it's just, we got to look at the future with brighter eyes to see what we can do to make it gentler and to make it more palatable for people. And yes, there's a lot to do in stormwater. The city is not keeping up with the standards for stormwater, in my belief. I've seen some culverts redone 8 years ago. They need to be done again. I've seen some stormwater on some of the roads and so forth, and it doesn't get better. But it's only because we're not planning well enough. But we're not planning well enough because you can't afford to plan well enough. So that's my outlook on it. Yes, we need money in stormwater. We need money in everything. But we need to be smart in how we get it. So thank you for listening to my tirade. I support you all. Thank you.
Councilman Hall?
I think we need a lot more information on the Surprise Lake.
Mhm.
I think we can't even think
Yep.
about passing that.
No.
It's just by what you're saying, even if we do it, it's not going to do any good in the long run. And if we still get grants, we're using money that isn't going anywhere technically. I personally can't justify that at all. I need more information to make a really good decision. I don't want to say no. I just think we need more information.
Yep.
We need to know down the line, are we doing any good? How does it affect the private citizens? I mean, there's so much that we don't know right now. And I think it's going to affect what's going to happen here to the ones that we probably need to work on. And I don't want to hold those up for that either.
Councilman Cedar?
I mean, on that point too, I would think that the development of that property, the new church going in is going to significantly change the way stormwater is flowing in that area. I don't know, not an engineer, but I can see that being an issue. So I agree.
And I think, and I still go back to our point of a private lake, which I call Surprise Lake, which is all private property. I just can't see spending $3 million on a solution there. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me in that case. That should be borne by the benefactors of the spending in that point. And I do agree with Councilman Cedar, with that development that's going across the street, that changes the whole name of the game, and understanding how that outflow is now managed. That is a private scenario over there that we don't, as a city, we're not managing that. And so I just have a problem with it being in this rate study, that part of it.
Yeah, we can run it without, just to see what the impact on rates are. Is that something, sounds like you'd all like to see that. Do you want me to run the cash-only scenario, or would you also be interested on?
All of them.
If
All
you
of
can
them?
run it through all of them, I
Yeah,
think.
and you
know,
can do it
just
side
so
by
we can
side.
see that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Any other questions for him? Councilmember White?
I'll just go on record and say that the cash-only scenario is what I would support as well. But I think that as a caveat to that, I'll say that I'm really uncomfortable with doubling the rate over such a short period of time. And I think that we should look at stretching out to prioritize the projects, and maybe we could raise the rates to a more reasonable level and be able to pay for those projects over a longer period of time. So whatever the highest priority project is, pay for that one, put the other ones on the back burner until that one is paid, and then do the next, so that we're still paying cash for things, but we're not shocking the citizenry so much with these rate increases. So I think we should look at the possibility of doing that as well.
Councilman Whalen?
And just one final note on that. I believe in system development charges. It's an appropriate thing to do when development comes in and so forth, that we can do what they need to have done without taking money from you. To a point. It doesn't balance out quite that way. But to pay a fair share to come in for system development. You have a huge development coming in, and I don't know what the system development charge would be for 4,000 people in a church. I'm just bringing that notice up.
Yeah. Well, I
Those are the
know,
important side.
I know the city has done that, because when, up at Faith Family, when we added 10,000 square feet of just gravel,
Yeah.
that increased our stormwater about $115 a month.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's, and so I know that process is happening in the city, because it happened to us when we,
Yeah.
because gravel base is not considered a pervious, it's considered impervious surface now, which I learned. Years ago it was not that way, but now it is considered a impervious surface, you know.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right. Next part of the presentation is that system development charge discussion. This would be, not really applying to existing customers unless there is some type of redevelopment that occurs to a higher intensity, additional impervious area. But typically this would be for new development as they connect to the system, would pay a one-time charge to help reimburse existing utility customers. And typically those proceeds are limited only to be spent on capital projects, not to offset operating costs, for example. On slide 20, just as a quick note there, the city does have a water utility system development charge. It's about $4,400 for the smallest water meter size. I believe the county also has a connection charge or system development charge. I'm not sure what they call it, but I know it does exist. No stormwater system development charge at this point for the city. And that'll be what we're talking about in this section is, do you want to implement one so that you can collect some revenue from growth as it occurs? And we'll talk about how we do that and what that charge might be. And then lastly, what other cities are doing in the region for stormwater system development charges. A little bit of background, I won't get too far into it, but we do note the revised Code of Washington reference that does provide for this. There is not a specific formula or an exact methodology outlined in the RCW, but it does note a couple of stipulations. It's got to be equitable cost of the system. It can include interest amounts. And while not stated here in terms of legality, based on case law and other projects we've worked on, we typically would recommend conservatively excluding grant-funded projects and only including projects that are truly funded by utility ratepayers. So slide 22 gets at the result there for the potential stormwater utility system development charge would be, it's a combination of what you've already got in the ground. So about $2.1 million is what we calculated. Also includes a share of future project costs that are anticipated to be funded from utility rates, and divides it by estimated system capacity. And we'll get into that capacity number on the next slide, but the resulting number is $416 per equivalent unit. So a new single-family home that is developed would pay that amount. If it's a commercial or multifamily type of development, they would pay $416 per 2,800 impervious square feet. So it would scale up in a similar way to the current monthly rate schedule. And of course, one thing to keep in mind, this would only generate revenue for capital as growth occurs. So in the ups and downs of development, it also depends on how much developable land remains within the city limits, could limit how much you actually receive from this charge, but it does provide some type of offset for rates over the long range. Okay, slide 23 is just a little bit of background on how we calculated estimated system capacity. We've had a couple of conversations with Jeff from Parametrics. His team took a look at the total parcel area within the city. It's about 1,300 acres. Based on some discussions with Jeff, it's an estimate, it's a planning estimate, but we assumed that at build out, roughly 60% of those parcel acres would be impervious, so about just under 800 impervious acres at build out. That's equivalent to about 13,000 equivalent units by dividing that by the equivalent 2,800 impervious square feet per single family equivalent. So that's how we come up with our costs divided by that denominator there, 12,400 equivalent units. That's how we get the $416. And then lastly is this SDC survey. We can see there currently the city has no stormwater SDC. If they were to implement the one calculated here, it would still be at the lowest level in this survey group here. Not quite as common as water and sewer utility SDCs, but it is becoming more and more common throughout the region as the cost of handling stormwater quantity and quality is going up. And so this is one way for utilities to begin to recover some capital costs from development as that occurs. But you can see there's a pretty wide range of citywide charges there, anywhere from about $500 per equivalent unit all the way on up to, you see Mount Lake Terrace, Kent, and Kenmore are all at that $3,000 level or more for an equivalent unit. So just to give you an idea of where those are in the region right now. And that's really the end of the planned discussion. We do have a couple of summary slides that shows the revenue requirement scenarios, slide 26, and then a consideration of whether or not council is interested in adopting a stormwater-specific system development charge. A couple of things I heard here tonight, y'all would like us to model those same 3 monthly rate scenarios without Surprise Lake, just to see what that difference would be. Councilman White also mentioned the possibility of spreading out the capital projects over a longer time period. That would, of course, impact the rates, so wondering if that's something you'd like us to look at as well, or at the same time, or just to focus on the CIP without Surprise Lake, with the timing of those other projects remaining the same.
Is the timing of those projects right now by 2029? Is that what it's looking at? Is it possible to present to us a phased-in program that maybe that currently is like a 5-year? Could we do a 5, 10, and 15 of project timeframe, knowing that year 10 you're going to have other projects come on too? So it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. But if it's spread out a little bit, we have 3 different phases to look at, 5, 10, 15 years. and without Surprise Lake on what that would look like over those type of scenarios.
Yeah, we could run that as well. One thing that we've seen, with other utilities, something to keep in mind is if you spread out the projects too far, raising rates without turning dirt, there could be some public types of questions that come up of, okay, rates are going up and I'm not seeing those projects completed. Something to consider of the timing of it, but it certainly would be a savings on the rates if we could spread those projects out over time.
I was just going to say, along with delaying those programs, the cost is going to significantly increase for those projects as you delay them down the road. So you have to factor that in as well.
That's a great point. A lot of things we've heard from utilities, from 2019 and early 2020 compared to project cost estimates today. A lot of those have gone up 30, 35% in just 3 years. So there is something to keep in mind there in terms of there could be some savings, but also projects will cost more down the road, the longer you wait.
Do most cities run under a CIP project development schedule? Have cities ran into where they say, hey, we're going to put X amount of dollars towards projects every year and build that into a rate structure? And if we don't have the money for it, we don't have the money for it. That kind of scenario.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty common. Most cities will have a 6 or 10-year CIP list that we can model against, but on occasion, we do have the question of more of a capital budgeting approach. If we wanted to have rates fund $500,000 of capital per year, what would the rate impact be?
Right.
And then each year, city staff, engineering experts could prioritize that capital budget. That's a different approach in terms of, looking at the budget versus individual projects in the forecast model. But we just need to know what approach you'd like us to come back with or communicate through Jose.
Any other thoughts about that type of look versus CIP? I mean,
I think we should look at all our options. So whatever we can, the more information that we have, as Councilmember Hall said, the better we can make a better decision.
I have a question. This is what we're currently paid 2023, and the projected was 2029. Are you taking an account of the increase of cost for this also, as far as it going, the cost of construction is going up? Have you included that in this estimate?
Yeah, good question. We have included both operating cost inflation estimates.
Okay.
I think 3 to 4% typically, and then we have assumed, I believe, 4% for construction cost inflation. I have to double check that, but we are assuming some level of annual cost inflation in the numbers for those capital projects that we looked at.
Okay.
The numbers Jeff put together, I believe, are in 2023 dollars, today's dollars. We try to estimate what that project in 2028 would be 5 years into the future. It's not going to cost what it was estimated to be, from today's planning estimates.
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our last item on our study session agenda tonight, we have our preliminary 2024 budget discussion. I'll turn that over to our Director of Finance.
Thank you. Well, the 2024 preliminary budget that's in your packet is the same as it was initially presented on October 9th. What's new in this packet is the job description of the 3 new positions we're wanting to add in this budget. So if anyone has any questions about those, I can address some, or I may ask our city clerk to fill in some details that she may know about those positions. And then also, we have this next meeting, November 20th, for the final approval. So certainly any questions that you have for me tonight that I don't have an answer, I can get back and email you all. And then certainly if you think of any questions, feel free to email me and I can respond.
Any questions? Councilman Cedar?
Thanks, Director Simpson. I actually don't have any questions about the positions. I do have, kind of relating back to what we talked about last week, some questions about the projected revenue from automated traffic enforcement. And I have kind of two questions here. One is, has that been considered, the impact on our budget? I don't believe it has, based on the head wagging that I see. And the second question I have is more of a policy question, which is how, from a financial standpoint perspective, how can we best set up a mechanism so that whatever is collected through automated traffic enforcement is redirected into a specific fund that benefits a certain aspect of the city, rather than it just going into a general fund or, some other pot of money where it gets commingled? So if you could either address that now or down the line, I would appreciate it.
I can look into it further, but my understanding is that as a council, you guys could choose where the funds go.
And I guess what my question is a little bit, and certainly understand that, but what is the mechanism by which we would do that? If it's just writing it into an ordinance, that's one tool for us to do, which we can obviously do. But then how will you handle that from a financial standpoint? Are you going to just be tracking it and it will still be commingled with other funds? And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because my fear is that when we see, I'm going to say ATE, Automated Traffic Enforcement Funds, when we see ATE funds come in and plus up something like our traffic calming or our parks fund, that we're then going to rob from those funds as we are currently planning for them and apply that money elsewhere in the city, and have some of the addiction to ATE funds that I think we've expressed some concern about.
Well, I would consider those funds restricted in that they would only be used for what council decided. And so to track that, they would have their own coding so that you could see through specific identification when those funds came in and then what they got used for.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because couldn't we just designate for example, a traffic safety fund? And then that traffic safety fund, it really doesn't matter what that's a subcategory of. It's just the fact that that's the traffic safety fund. And if we wanted to put in speed bumps and use the funds in that, we'd have to designate too, what are those funds? How can they be, we have to determine how can they be used? I mean, that's what it seems to me. And we have to determine as a group, yeah, it's okay, we can use those for speed bumps. Yes, we can use those if the police need the strips, sorry, I don't know the term, if they're doing a pursuit, anyway, thank you. I've never had anybody use them on me, so I don't know. But you get the idea, we have to delineate where those funds can go. And those could be probably some interesting discussions too, because to some people it's, no, that would count. No, that wouldn't. But I think we have to determine those three things.
I think as long as we have the mechanism in place that the funds are allocated and designated, I mean, it's at that point, it's, and having a separate bars number for it and whatever, yeah. Any other questions? Councilman Strader?
Yeah, I have a question about the deputy clerk position. What's the difference between deputy clerk position and I believe there used to be a finance tech 1 and finance tech 2?
There's still a finance tech 1 and a finance tech 2. They work on my team as part of the finance group. The deputy clerk would work with the city clerk and the mayor. As you probably already know, the city clerk has two main responsibilities, being the city clerk and also being our HR generalist. And my understanding is in 2024, their HR responsibilities and role will grow. So this new the deputy clerk could help with some of the clerk's current work and also projects and tasks that have been identified but have been put on the back burner because there's just so much time that one person has to be our HR person and be our city clerk.
Well, if there's too much responsibility on the city clerk now, and this job would then be used to assist in those other duties then for the clerk?
They would be supporting the mayor and the city clerk. And of course, the city clerk also does all of our HR.
All right. And so all those other responsibilities are being taken care of by the city clerk only?
I think I will defer to Tricia Summers, who's our city clerk, to maybe tell you more about the HR roles that she covers, as well as a lot of their city clerk duties.
I don't know exactly the question that you're asking.
Well, I'm just trying to get an idea of what all the responsibilities that the city clerk would be doing, or the deputy clerk would be doing, opposed to, doesn't the finance tech and 1 and the finance tech 2 take any of those responsibilities?
No, the
Okay.
deputy clerk would not have anything to do with the finance department.
Okay,
They would be in Building A. They would be assisting with city clerk duties, maybe attending meetings when I can't, and also helping the mayor with different projects, but nothing at all to do with finance, no.
okay. And what is Martin Moore's position?
He's community outreach.
Okay. And
So he's in charge of the newsletter, he's in charge of getting, all the different programs that are over at the MAC. Currently assisting mayor on special projects. Boy, there's,
yeah.
yeah.
And we had a temporary, a part-time position as our or as a deputy clerk, is that correct? And then we did away with that?
The part-time person that was here was, I would say, probably 3/4 community outreach and maybe a quarter
Okay,
deputy clerk. So she took on those roles. She was part-time and went out on maternity and didn't want to come back in a full-time capacity.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Councilman
It looks
Whitaker?
like the deputy, to get the deputy clerk would just be helping you with more administrative, yes? Right? So then it frees you up to do more HR, more, what would I say, more tactical level tasks than just administrative operationals. Correct?
Well, the packet itself is,
I know it's pretty self-explanatory.
I mean, no, but the packet itself is a big job. And,
Yeah, no, I just mean, that's what I got from it, is that they're a more administrative position. And which, on that, then, like I said, it helps you out.
I was curious about the educational experience, and this person would be also dealing with public disclosure requests as well, assisting you with those. Wouldn't it be important to have that as part of some kind of requirement for having that kind of experience so that they're not just going into it cold? Okay. All right.
It's there.
Councilmember Cedar just answered my question.
Anyone else? Any other questions on the budget presentation and the budget that we have in our packet? All right, well, you have anything else for us? We're good? All right, well, seeing that all agenda items have been concluded, I adjourn this meeting at 8:40.